We recently had a fair amount of success and positive feedback on a video looking at the 7 greatest attacking trios of all time. There were lots of interesting suggestions for similar videos we could do, from the best centre-back partnerships to the best midfields, but the one we're going to look at today is the best back fours. It's worth noting that only really since the early 1960s have back fours become commonplace, which is good news for many of you since you often tell me off for including anyone before the 1990s. The back four rule is bad news for some great Italian defences though, with the nation often having had a fondness for a back five. As with our attacking trios video, we made a list of over 25 fantastic back fours and then ranked them out of 10 for individual talents and out of 10 for how well they operated as a unit, with their overall score out of 20 determining who featured and where they featured. For example, Greece's back four at Euro 2004 scored very highly for their performance as a unit, but not so highly for their individual talents. Also, just like last time, longevity isn't a contributing factor, but the back four must have spent at least one season or one major tournament playing together. Here are our 7 greatest back fours of all time. Kennedy, Hansen, Lawrenson and Neil. Just edging out some quite brilliant back fours to make 7th place in this 7, and we will look at the honourable mentions between 1st and 2nd place as usual, is Liverpool's back four of the mid-1980s. Hansen was the pick of the bunch, a world-class centre-half with a brilliant understanding of the game, but both centre-backs were comfortable bringing the ball out from the back. Kennedy was a real outlet down the left, whilst Neil was a tireless and intelligent right-back. In their 4 years together, the quartet won 3 First Division titles, 3 League Cups, a European Cup and a Charity Shield. De Boer, Blind, right guard and Reiziger. This is the most controversial inclusion in this 7, and we'll explain why. I was quite strict when putting this list together to only include back fours, and the quartet featured here are a bit of an unusual case. Far from a conventional back four, one could argue that it was a back 3 made up of De Boer, Blind and Reiziger, whilst right guards sometimes operated in a slightly more advanced role as a sweeper. We have decided that a sweeper should count as part of a back line, and therefore this Ajax defence of the mid-1990s makes it in. All Dutch internationals who won 42, 72, 73 and 112 caps for their country respectively, these 4 scored highly for individual ability. Frank Rijkaard, despite being on the verge of retirement, was still the standout player. A wonderfully intelligent and complete footballer, between him and Frank de Boer, Ajax had 2 defenders of exceptional technical ability who were both sublime passers of a ball. Blind was also a veteran by this point, but he still had fantastic stamina and served as captain of the team, whilst Reiziger had searing pace despite not being quite as defensively or technically proficient. This quartet only really spent 1 season together, but they did win an Eredivisie, Champions League and Johan Cruyff Shield treble in that season. Maldini, Nesta, Stam and Cafu. Well, you can imagine how highly this quartet scored in terms of individual ability. All 4 were world class, and that's not a term we use lightly. Maldini, Nesta and Cafu were all lengthy servants to AC Milan, but Jaap Stam only spent 2 seasons at the San Siro, meaning it was just 2 seasons that these 4 spent together. During that time, the club probably didn't have as much success as you'd expect, although they came mightily close. They won the Italian Super Cup, finished as Serie A runners-up in both seasons, lost to Liverpool in the 2005 Champions League final and Barcelona in the 2006 Champions League semi-final. Maldini was a first-class student of the game with impeccable defensive pedigree. You could use the same description to describe Alessandro Nesta, who is one of the game's all-time great centre-backs, despite his injury troubles. Stam was just a defensive colossus whose size, speed and strength made him so difficult to beat, and Cafu seemed to have 3 lungs, with his extraordinary stamina making him a nightmare for any opponent down that right flank. Facchetti, Guarneri, Pichi and Bergnic. A back 4 which formed the bedrock of Inter Milan's famed grande inter-side of the early to mid-1960s for 5 years, this quartet was typically Italian. Take nothing away from their footballing talents, Facchetti in particular was arguably Europe's first great offensive full-back, but all 4 were so astute defensively. In fact, in terms of pure defensive solidity, we'd be tempted to name these 4 as the best back 4 of all time. Facchetti was a real menace who loved to bomb forward down the left, Guarneri was a rock-solid centre-back, Pichi used his exceptional reading of the game to operate as a sweeper, and Bergnic was nicknamed The Rock, so we'll let you guess what type of player he was. Under the leadership of Elenio Herrera, this back 4 contributed to 3 Serie A titles, 2 European Cups and 2 Intercontinental Cups in just 5 years together. Breitner, Schwarzenbeck, Beckenbauer and Voss. Into the top 3, and we're now talking about some seriously impenetrable back 4s. In third place is the West German defence between 1971 and 1977, made up of Paul Breitner, Hans-Georg Schwarzenbeck, Franz Beckenbauer and Bertie Vogts. 3 of those 4 featured in our positional greatest of all time series, and even the least well known, Schwarzenbeck, was a very accomplished centre-back. Beckenbauer, also known as the Kaiser, is the greatest defender of all time, having begun his career in central midfield. A brilliant reader of the game who was so brave, technical, and an excellent passer of the ball. When we talk about sweepers in football, no one comes close. Breitner was a tireless left-back who could do it all, whilst Vogts was as consistent as they come, providing such energy, intelligence, and athleticism down the right. Together, they won the World Cup in 1974, whilst all but Vogts won plenty more together at Bayern Munich. Lizarazu, Blanc, Desailly and Thuram. Once again, man for man, what an incredible quartet of players this is. France's back 4 as they won consecutive major trophies at the 1998 World Cup and Euro 2000, these 4 were all top class. A left back, Lizarazu could run for days. Blanc, a giant converted attacking midfielder, brought a combination of class and technique to the back line. Desailly was a rock, refusing to be beaten on the ground or in the air, and Thuram is among the finest right backs the game has ever seen. When these 4 played together, France never lost a game, and that is quite incredible. They came within inches of topping this 7. The honourable mentions. It is at this point that I tell you some of the combinations that made our shortlist, and you head over to the comments and tell me all the ones I forgot, some of whom I may actually have overlooked, and some of whom I just don't rate as highly as you. One back 4 that you may have been expecting to feature could have been Arsenal's quartet of Winterburn, Adams, Bold and Dixon, who were just half a point behind 7th place. Sticking in England, the recent back 4s of Cole, Terry, Carvalho and Ferreira at Chelsea, and Evra, Vidic, Ferdinand and Neville at Manchester United both earned inclusions. The most recent of all was Real Madrid's back 4 of Marcelo, Varane, Ramos and Carvajal, who we think are narrowly superior to Marcelo, Pepe, Ramos and Carvajal. Greece's 2004 back 4, who were mentioned in the introduction, were considered, having enjoyed great success with their unusual tactical approach as the Greeks recorded a shock European title. So too were Brazil's back 4 of Nilton Santos, Orlando, Bellini and Jalma Santos, who formed the backbone of their 1962 World Cup success. Those are just some of our particularly honourable mentions. We'd love to hear your suggestions, but firstly, there is the small matter of top spot. Maldini, Baresi, Costacurta and Tassotti. When it comes to defending, the Italians do it better. It makes sense then for this 7 to be topped by an Italian backline, and one containing 4 of the finest defenders to have ever put on a pair of boots. Paolo Maldini, who is comfortably among the greatest defenders to have ever lived, is the only man to feature in this 7 twice. Franco Baresi, who we would argue is even better defensively, captained this AC Milan side. Costacurta was an uncompromising and intelligent centre-back, whilst Tassotti was just a brilliant all-round right-back. As well as containing 2 all-time greats and 2 world-class defenders though, these 4 play brilliantly as a unit. Longevity isn't taken into account here, but if it was, they'd have come out on top even more comfortably. They spent 11 years playing together, during which time they developed an extraordinary understanding. Under Arrigo Sacchi, Milan began playing an extraordinary pressing game, where their defence took on a madman approach of squeezing the opposition, hunting in packs, and attempting to play them offside. It was bizarre to watch, but incredibly effective. Between 1988 and 1995, under firstly Sacchi and then Fabio Capello, Milan won the European Cup 3 times and were losing finalists twice. So that's it for our 7. Thanks for watching, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for more from us if you enjoyed the video, and you can now also follow us on Twitter for more ramblings from me. Our username is simply at HITC Sevens.
This is a Chucky Beat production.